Imagine waking up on, like, a normal Saturday morning.
Right.
You pour yourself a cup of coffee, you check the news, and you discover that the President of the United States has just signed an executive order that explicitly names your employer as a national security risk.
Oh, wow. Just out of nowhere.
Literally out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's not, a whole industry. It's not a foreign adversary. It's
Yeah.
your specific private company.
Yeah.
And let's say you work for a prestigious century-old law firm.
Mm.
What exactly do you do?
I mean, panic.
Well, yeah, probably. But if you're sitting in that office in early 2025, you do the only thing you actually know how to do. You draft a lawsuit and you sue the president.
You sue the president, right. It's a stunning scenario. And yet it's just this one tiny thread in a massive tapestry of legal conflict that really defined that specific moment in time.
It really did.
Because when you look at how government traditionally operates, there's, an assumed rhythm to it. The legislative branch debates something, the executive branch implements it, and then the judicial branch occasionally steps in to resolve ambiguities.
Right. It's this full process.
Exactly. But what happens when that rhythm completely collapses?
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome, everyone, to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are the kind of learner who wants to, pull back the curtain and understand the actual mechanics of how power is wielded and how it is resisted, you are definitely in the right place today.
Oh, for sure.
Because our mission today is to analyze a truly extraordinary document. We're digging into this incredibly dense, comprehensive tracker that was published by Fox News back in early 2025.
Yeah, and it's a massive document.
It really is. It meticulously catalogs this huge, totally unprecedented wave of litigation that was launched during the very first days of Donald Trump's second term.
And, our vantage point today is crucial for this.
Yep.
Sitting here on May 21st, 2026, we have the benefit of hindsight. We aren't caught in the immediate, the frenzy of that breaking news cycle anymore.
Right, we can actually take a breath.
Exactly. We are looking back at what serves as a literal blueprint for how the, quote, new resistance mobilized in those first 100 days.
But before we get into the mechanisms and the specific lawsuits, because there are a lot of them, we need to set some very strict ground rules for you, the listener.
Very important.
We are examining highly politically charged source material today, and our job here is strictly to act as your analytical guides.
Right. Just mapping it out.
Exactly. We are not taking sides. We are not validating or endorsing any of the viewpoints, any of the executive orders, or any of the hundreds of lawsuits mentioned in this tracker.
We're totally impartial here.
Purely impartial. We're here purely to map out the factual landscape of this legal clash. We are treating this document as an artifact of American political and legal history, just to understand the mechanics of modern governance.
Right. Our goal is to dissect the engine of this conflict, not to debate the underlying politics of the passengers, so to speak.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. And, when you look at that engine, the sheer scale of what happened is just difficult to overstate.
It really is.
The Fox News tracker catalogs over 200 lawsuits. 200! And that's against more than 90 executive orders, proclamations, and memos.
That's just a staggering amount of paperwork.
And this didn't happen over a 4-year term either. This all occurred in a window of just over 3 months, literally between January 20 and early May of 2025.
Okay, let's just pause and visualize that for a second. Over 200 major federal lawsuits against 90 distinct presidential actions in 100 days.
It's wild.
Imagine a president sitting at the Resolute desk, right? Signing a towering stack of sweeping new directives. And instantaneously, this decentralized army of lawyers across 50 states just hits print on hundreds of injunction requests.
Yeah, they're just waiting for the ink to dry.
Exactly. It's like a legislative full-court press, but it's being played out entirely within the judicial system.
Which requires us to completely reframe how we view the court system in the first place.
How so?
Well, traditionally, the judiciary is the final arbiter. It's the slow, deliberate referee that steps in way after a law has been passed, implemented, and then eventually challenged by someone who was harmed.
Right. It takes years sometimes.
Exactly. But what this tracker reveals is a total paradigm shift. The legal system was utilized not as a final arbiter, but as the immediate, real-time battlefield for policy.
The courts became the first line of defense
Huh.
rather than the last resort.
Exactly. So to understand how we got to a point where the judiciary is effectively forced to act as the legislature by default, we really have to understand the mindset of the players involved.
Yeah, we have to look at the psychology here.
Right, and the source material actually does an excellent job of laying out the explicit rhetoric and the underlying strategies of both the administration and the opposition long before that first gavel even fell.
Let's start with the administration's perspective then, because the tracker notes that Donald Trump entered this second term having been a sustained legal target himself.
Yeah, that's a key piece of context.
It highlights the 2024 election cycle, where he faced 4 separate criminal indictments, and that included the 34 guilty counts in Manhattan in the spring of 2024.
Right, and the article is careful to note that Trump has consistently maintained his innocence across all of those cases.
Correct.
But the crucial takeaway for our deep dive is how those specific experiences shaped the administration's view of the legal system coming into power.
Right, how they viewed the courts.
From their vantage point, these actions were categorized under a very specific term. They called it lawfare.
Lawfare. That's such a heavy word.
But is it? They viewed the justice system as having been inherently weaponized by political opponents to derail his political efforts.
It's a fascinating concept, lawfare, because it implies that litigation is no longer about seeking justice in, like, a vacuum. It's a tactical weapon in a broader political war.
Exactly. It's structural.
But here is where the friction really starts. You flip over to the perspective of the resistance, and they are using almost the exact same conceptual framework, just inverted.
Yeah, it's a mirror image.
The source quotes New York Attorney General Letitia James right after the election. She publicly vowed to, quote, fight back. She specifically said, "We faced this challenge before, and we used the rule of law to fight back."
Notice the phrasing there, the rule of law.
Right. She framed her explicit job description as protecting and defending the rights of New Yorkers and defending the rule of law.
And that framing is critical. By claiming the mantle of the rule of law, Letitia James was setting up the state of New York and, by extension, this whole coalition of aligned states as a defensive shield.
A preemptive defensive shield.
Exactly. It's essentially a preemptive declaration of legal war. But the rhetoric didn't stop with state attorneys general.
No, it went straight to Congress.
It did. The Fox News article highlights the language coming from federal Democratic lawmakers, and the tone is incredibly combative and, honestly, highly coordinated.
It really was. You have the House Minority Leader, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, declaring very clearly, we are going to fight it legislatively, we're going to fight it in the courts, we're going to fight it in the streets.
In the courts and in the streets.
And that wasn't just an isolated comment. Representative Ayanna Pressley said virtually the exact same thing at a rally outside the Treasury Department in February. She said, "We will see you in the court, in Congress, in the streets."
It's a unified messaging strategy.
And at that same rally, Representative Jasmine Crockett added, "We are going to be in your face, and we are going to make sure you understand what democracy looks like, and this ain't it."
When you analyze that rhetoric mechanically, what really stands out is the complete lack of secrecy.
Right, they aren't hiding this.
Not at all. This wasn't some covert legal strategy hatched in a smoky back room. It was a very public, broadcasted declaration of preemptive litigation.
A warning shot.
Yeah. When lawmakers and state attorneys general publicly promise to meet every single policy move with a lawsuit, they are signaling a massive structural shift. They are telling the administration that traditional governance is basically over.
And every executive action is going to require a judicial permission slip.
Exactly. But the administration didn't just quietly accept this incoming barrage either.
No, they push back hard.
The source points out that Alina Habba, serving as counselor to the president, publicly warned of repercussions for anyone going after the administration's executive orders.
So the battle lines are drawn in permanent marker.
Totally.
But this raises a massive structural question for me. If both the administration and the opposition fundamentally believe they are the true defenders of the rule of law,
Right.
and both are using the courts to execute their political mandates, doesn't the court system just become an extension of the election?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, structurally, is this just normal checks and balances, or does lawfare eventually break the system entirely?
It is the defining structural question of this era, honestly. And what the source material illustrates is that this is absolutely not normal checks and balances.
It's something new.
It's the speed and the sheer volume of the litigation that fundamentally alter the nature of the judiciary
Because they can't handle it?
because of what they're being asked to do. If an administration attempts to govern primarily through a relentless barrage of rapid-fire executive orders,
Right.
and the opposition responds primarily through mass coordinated litigation, the judiciary is suddenly dragged into the center of every single political dispute.
They're refereeing the day-to-day.
Judges are no longer just interpreting the law, they are effectively being asked to manage the daily operations of the federal government. It is a massive shift of power away from the legislature and directly into the laps of federal judges.
Okay, with that strategic reality established, let's dive into the first major arena of conflict that the tracker outlines.
Let's do it.
The source spends a significant amount of time on the administration's effort to radically overhaul the federal bureaucracy. And the absolute tip of the spear for this effort was the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
Right. Chaired by Elon Musk.
Yep.
According to the Fox News tracker, the stated public mission of DOGE was to ruthlessly cut government overspending and weed out entrenched corruption and mismanagement of taxpayer funds across federal agencies.
And the administration was highly focused on very specific targets right out of the gate.
They were.
In an exclusive Fox News interview with Bret Baier in early February, the president specifically called out fraud at the United States Agency for International Development, USI.
Oh, yeah.
He stated, "We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of money that's going to places where it shouldn't be going."
Yeah.
So the mandate for Elon Musk and DOGE was essentially to go in, open the books, find the waste, and stop it.
But opening the books of the federal government is vastly more complicated than opening the books of, like, a private tech company.
Right. You can't just ask for the passwords.
Exactly. And that is exactly where the legal brick wall materialized. The tracker details a massive lawsuit filed by a coalition of 19 state attorneys general.
19.
Yeah. They sued specifically to restrict DOGE and Musk from accessing the Treasury Department's internal payment and data systems.
It worked, didn't it?
It did. In this dramatic move early on a Saturday morning, a federal judge actually agreed with those states.
Wow.
The judge issued a temporary order blocking the DOGE team's access to the Treasury data, citing a risk of irreparable harm.
Okay, we need to unpack this mechanically.
Yeah.
Because irreparable harm is one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot in legal dramas on TV. But what does it actually mean in this specific context?
It's a very specific legal threshold.
How can a group of states claim they will be irreparably harmed just because an advisory board looks at federal Treasury data?
That is the crucial mechanical question here. To get a judge to stop the federal government from doing something immediately, which is what an injunction is, the plaintiff has to prove that if the action continues, it will cause damage that cannot be fixed later with money or with a subsequent ruling.
It's a bell you can't unring.
Exactly. That is irreparable harm. In the case of the Treasury data, the states likely argued that they have legally protected confidential financial information running through those federal systems.
Like what kind of information?
We're talking about information regarding state funding, citizen tax data, or joint state-federal program disbursements. Millions of data points.
Oh, yeah.
Their argument is that if a non-traditional, non-cleared entity like DOGE gets unrestricted access to that data, the privacy breach is instant and it is permanent.
You can't unsee the data.
Right. Once it's compromised, the harm is irreparable.
And the president's reaction to that specific ruling was very telling. Bret Baier asked him about that Saturday morning injunction, and he was really blunt about it.
What did he say?
He said, "I disagree with it 100%. I think it's crazy, and we have to solve the efficiency problem."
Yeah, that tension between efficiency and procedure.
Exactly. But the 19 states were just the beginning. The tracker outlines a whole constellation of lawsuits targeting DOGE from entirely different angles.
It really was a multi-front war because beyond the states, you have a completely distinct cluster of lawsuits concerning the disclosure of personal and financial records.
Right.
The tracker lists plaintiffs like the American Federation of Government Employees, which is this massive federal union.
Huge union.
You also have the Electronic Privacy Information Center, the ACLU, and even groups you might not immediately associate with federal data management,
A coup.
like the Japanese American Citizens League and the Sierra Club, all of them filing suits in February and March.
Okay, imagine a CEO bringing in a high-powered, ruthless, external auditing firm to completely restructure their company.
Yeah.
But the very moment the auditors walk into the building, the HR department, the employee union, and a coalition of civil liberties, watchdogs instantly sue the CEO to block the auditors from ever seeing the employee files or the expense reports.
That's actually a perfect analogy.
They're essentially saying, wait, who are these auditors? Do they have federal security clearances? Are they bound by federal privacy laws, or are they just going to publish our private data on social media?
That analogy hits the absolute core of the legal tension because the federal government is not a private corporation.
Right.
It is bound by incredibly strict, decades-old privacy laws designed specifically to prevent the unauthorized sharing of personal data.
Which is what the ACLU is arguing.
Exactly. The ACLU and the federal unions are utilizing those established privacy frameworks to argue that handing vast amounts of sensitive federal data to an external, quasi-governmental advisory body, one chaired by a private citizen, violates the fundamental legal protections of civil servants and private citizens alike.
And then there is another angle entirely that the tracker brings up. It lists a second cluster of DOGE lawsuits focused purely on records retention and transparency.
Yeah, the FACA lawsuits.
Right. We see organizations like Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, commonly known as GREWRU. We see the Democracy Forward Foundation and the Environmental Defense Fund.
They're going after the process.
Exactly. They aren't just suing over what DOGE is looking at. They are suing over how DOGE is operating internally.
Right. They're invoking laws like the Federal Advisory Committee Act or FACA and the Presidential Records Act.
Let's look at FACA mechanically, because that seems important.
It is. FACA was enacted in the 1970s. It was designed to ensure that when the president sets up a committee of outside experts to give advice, that committee operates transparently.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning FACA requires these committees to hold open public meetings. They have to publish their minutes. They have to make their records available to the public.
Oh, wow.
So the argument these watchdog groups are making is simple. If DOGE is going to operate within the government and influence monumental policy decisions, it cannot act like a secretive Silicon Valley startup.
It has to be public.
It must comply with the grueling, slow transparency requirements of FACA.
Which fundamentally conflicts with the entire premise of DOGE.
Yeah.
DOGE is supposed to be rapid, disruptive, and wildly efficient.
You can't really be a disruptive startup if you have to publish a notice in the Federal Register 15 days before every single meeting you hold.
Exactly. So the court is basically being asked to referee an ideological collision. A collision between the desire for radical executive efficiency on one hand and the entrenched statutory demand for bureaucratic transparency on the other.
Precisely. And this is exactly why the administration didn't just rely on DOGE.
Right, they had other plans.
While DOGE was fighting in court over data access and transparency, the administration was simultaneously pulling entirely different levers to reshape the government from the inside.
Which brings us to the broader bureaucratic overhaul, what we can call the workforce squeeze.
Yeah.
The tracker lists a series of sweeping executive actions aimed directly at the structural pillars of the civil service. We see an executive order titled Restoring Accountability to Policy-Influencing Positions Within the Federal Workforce.
That's a big one.
We see another called Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And the source explicitly notes actions aimed at removing independent agency leaders and terminating inspectors general across the government.
This represents a profound shift because this isn't just about auditing the budget anymore. This is an attempt to fundamentally change the employment protections of the people running the agencies.
How so?
Well, the policy influencing positions order is generally understood as an effort to reclassify thousands of career civil servants into a category where they can be fired much more easily.
So stripping their protections.
Exactly. Removing the traditional civil service protections that usually insulate them from political transitions.
And the resistance from within the bureaucracy to that was immediate and fierce.
Oh, yeah.
The tracker shows the FBI Agents Association, along with several John and Jane Doe FBI agents, filing a lawsuit on February 4th over that weaponization executive order.
Which is huge.
You also have high-level Senate-confirmed officials fighting their removals in court. Kathy Harris, the chair of the Merit Systems Protection Board, sued to keep her position.
Right.
And on February 12th, a group of former inspectors general, including Robert P. Storch and Michael J. Missel, sued over their sudden terminations.
Mechanically, these lawsuits revolve around the specific statutory protections Congress has granted to certain roles.
Explain that.
Well, inspectors general, for example, are designed by law to be independent watchdogs within agencies. By firing them en masse, the administration is asserting maximum executive authority under Article 2 of the Constitution.
Article 2 meaning the president is the boss.
Exactly. The idea that the president has total, unchecked control over the executive branch. But the plaintiffs are arguing that Congress created these roles with specific for-cause firing protections.
Meaning the president can't just fire them because he disagrees with their politics.
Right. Once again, the federal courts are forced to decide exactly where the president's power ends and Congress's structural design begins.
But the administration didn't just target the personnel. They went after the absolute lifeblood of the entire system. The money.
The funding.
The tracker details executive actions related to a massive, temporary pause of federal grants, loans, and assistance programs. But the specific maneuver that really caught my eye was the targeted reduction in the indirect cost reimbursement rate for research institutions.
Yes.
They specifically called out the National Institutes of Health, or NIH.
And this specific financial maneuver triggered what might be the single most powerful coalition of plaintiffs in the entire tracker. Because when the administration altered that NIH reimbursement rate, they didn't just tweak a budget, they hit the central nervous system of American academia and medical research.
And they sued immediately. On February 10th, this staggering coalition sued. The list of plaintiffs here is basically a roster of the most elite intellectual institutions on the planet.
Read the list. It's wild.
You have the Association of American Universities, Brandeis, Brown, the entire University of California system, Caltech, Carnegie Mellon, the University of Chicago, Cornell, George Washington University, Johns Hopkins, MIT, the University of Pennsylvania, Rochester, Tufts.
Unbelievable.
And on that exact same day, the Association of American Medical Colleges and various massive hospital associations also filed suit.
To understand why these elite institutions mobilize so instantly, we really have to understand the mechanics of what indirect costs actually are.
Please, because I think a lot of people don't know how that works.
Sure. When a researcher at Johns Hopkins gets, say, a $10 million grant from the NIH to study cancer, that money doesn't just pay for microscopes and test tubes.
Right.
A significant percentage of it, often 30 to 50%, goes directly to the university as an indirect cost reimbursement.
Right, because the university has to actually keep the lights on in the lab. They have to pay for the hazardous waste disposal, the massive electricity bills for the servers running the data, the security for the building, the administrative staff managing the compliance.
It's expensive to run a lab.
That overhead is incredibly expensive.
Exactly. So when the executive branch suddenly signs an order radically reducing or pausing that specific reimbursement rate, it doesn't just annoy the university. It threatens to bankrupt the entire research infrastructure overnight.
Wow.
You cannot run a cutting-edge cancer lab if the federal government suddenly stops paying the electric bill halfway through the experiment.
Right, which goes back to...
That is the definition of the irreparable harm we discussed earlier.
Okay, but I have to push back here because I think a lot of listeners might be wondering about the raw authority at play in this specific instance.
Go.
If the executive branch, the president and his cabinet, controls these federal agencies, right?
Yes.
And these federal grants are fundamentally just taxpayer dollars being distributed by those executive branch agencies. Doesn't the president have the ultimate constitutional authority to just turn off the tap?
It's a great question.
Why do a bunch of elite universities or public broadcasters or state governments think they have an inherent legal right to demand this specific flow of taxpayer money?
It is a brilliant question, and it really strikes at the heart of the power of the purse.
Okay.
The Constitution grants the power of the purse exclusively to Congress. Congress passes a law appropriating a specific amount of money for a specific purpose like, say, NIH cancer research.
Right.
The executive branch is simply the bank teller. Their job is to distribute the funds exactly as Congress directed.
So the president can't just veto the check after Congress has already written it?
Historically, no. In the 1970s, Congress actually passed the Impoundment Control Act specifically to stop presidents from refusing to spend appropriated funds.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Furthermore, these grants operate under the Administrative Procedure Act, or the APA.
The APA, we hear that a lot.
You do. The APA requires that any major change to how an agency operates or distributes funds must go through a grueling month-long process of public notice and comment.
So you can't just tweet out a change.
You cannot just change the financial rules of the federal government via a midnight memo. So the universities and states are suing to argue that the administration is illegally impounding funds and violating the APA by unilaterally rewriting the contracts that keep American research and local governments functioning.
It is a phenomenal collision of powers. The administration claims ultimate executive authority to stop what they view as wasteful spending, and the plaintiffs utilize the Administrative Procedure Act to freeze that authority in its tracks.
Exactly.
And while this highly technical bureaucratic war over money and data is raging, the administration was simultaneously opening a front that had profound, immediate physical impacts on human beings,
Yes.
which leads us to the clash over immigration and the border.
Right. The Fox News Tracker documents a relentless succession of executive orders focused on border enforcement, and they started literally on Inauguration Day.
Day one.
On January 20th, we see the order protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship.
Okay.
Shortly after, the tracker lists protecting the American people against invasion, along with rapid executive actions to end temporary protected status, or TPS for Venezuela,
Right.
and moves to radically expand the Migrant Operations Center at Guantanamo Bay.
But out of all the border directives mentioned, there is one specific maneuver mentioned in the source that is truly breathtaking in its historical scope.
Oh, the 1798 law.
Yes. The tracker notes a presidential proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act regarding the, quote, invasion of the United States by Trinidad, which, for context, is a vicious transnational criminal gang.
The invocation of the Alien Enemies Act is a fascinating and highly controversial legal strategy.
It's incredibly old.
It is a law that dates all the way back to 1798. It was passed during the administration of John Adams.
John Adams.
Yeah. Mechanically, the act gives the president extraordinary, sweeping powers to detain, relocate, or deport non-citizens who are from a hostile nation or government.
But there's a catch, right?
Right, provided the United States is in a declared war or facing an active invasion from that specific foreign nation.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of applying a law from 1798 to a situation in 2025.
Let's do it.
The administration is taking an ancient statute, one originally designed to round up citizens of actual enemy empires during a state of war, and they're applying it to a modern decentralized street gang, Trinidad.
Yeah.
It feels like trying to use a naval cannon to take out a very specific sniper hiding in an apartment building.
Yeah.
The tool doesn't seem to match the target. Does pulling a historical wartime statute like this out of the archives just automatically invite massive legal challenges?
It absolutely guarantees it because it pushes the statute far beyond its established legal boundaries.
How so?
Well, when civil rights groups challenge this in court, their argument hinges on the very specific text of that 1798 law. The Alien Enemies Act requires the target to be a nation or a government.
And a gang isn't a nation.
Exactly. A transnational criminal syndicate, no matter how violent or pervasive, is not a sovereign nation. It doesn't have a flag, a capital, or a recognized government.
Right.
So the plaintiffs will argue that the president cannot unilaterally redefine a criminal gang as a foreign nation just to unlock extreme wartime detention powers that bypass standard due process and immigration courts.
And when you look at the tracker, the pushback against these border policies isn't just coming from the usual massive civil rights organizations or state attorneys general.
No, it's very local.
We do see states like Washington, Arizona, and Illinois suing. But the list of community-level plaintiffs is incredibly specific and deeply localized.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating.
You have groups like the New Hampshire Indonesian Community Support, you have Make the Road New York, Haitian Americans United, the League of United Latin American Citizens.
And that local mobilization becomes even more pronounced when you look at the lawsuits regarding where enforcement is actually taking place.
Right, the sensitive areas.
The source notes a fierce legal battle regarding ICE directives and immigration enforcement in sensitive areas, specifically places of worship and schools.
This is where the abstract legal theory hits the pavement in local communities. Let's look at the lawsuit filed on February 11th. It is extraordinary in its scope.
The multi-faith one.
Yes, it's a massive, unified, multi-faith coalition suing the federal government over enforcement in sacred spaces. We are talking about the Mennonite Church USA, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, the United Methodist Church, the Unitarian Universalist Association.
That's huge.
You have major Islamic groups and Catholic organizations. It is an incredibly broad theological front, just walking into a federal courtroom together.
And we have to ask why they are suing. They aren't just suing over abstract policy, they are suing to protect their physical geography.
Explain that.
Historically, there have been internal agency memos suggesting that immigration enforcement should be restricted in sensitive locations like churches, hospitals, and schools.
So ICE wouldn't generally go in there.
Right. If an executive order rescinds those protections, the physical sanctuary of a church is literally compromised.
And we saw the exact same dynamic with schools. The very next day, February 12th, Denver Public Schools filed a massive lawsuit related to immigration enforcement in and around educational facilities.
The mechanism at play here is the concept of a chilling effect.
What does that mean for a school?
Denver Public Schools isn't just worried about ICE agents walking into a cafeteria. They are arguing that the mere threat of enforcement near a school fundamentally destroys their ability to fulfill their legal mandate to educate children.
Because kids won't show up.
Exactly. If undocumented parents or even legal residents with undocumented family members are terrified to drop their kids off at school because of new enforcement directives, those children disappear from the education system. The school district is suing, asserting that the executive branch's enforcement tactics are actively sabotaging the local government's ability to function.
It is a profound realization. These executive orders didn't just activate political opponents in Washington, D.C. They sent shockwaves that activated civil society at the granular community level.
Down to the local school drop-off line.
Exactly. When a policy threatens the physical safety of a local school drop-off line or a Sunday morning church service, local institutions feel compelled to seek judicial intervention just to protect their physical and operational spaces. It's a ground-up legal resistance, not just a top-down one.
Which perfectly transitions into the final and perhaps most intensely personal battleground detailed in the Hawks News Tracker.
Oh, yeah, the cultural front.
We've covered the structural fight over the bureaucracy, the financial fight over academic grants, and the community fight over the border. Now we arrive at the administration's aggressive push into cultural, social, and institutional identity.
The tracker outlines several executive orders that directly target cultural and social policies across the entire federal apparatus. We see orders with highly charged titles.
Like what?
Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. We see the order ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs, and another titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation.
These are directives that seek to instantly rewrite the internal social policies of every single federal agency. And they extended deeply into the military infrastructure as well.
Right.
The tracker notes an order titled Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness.
And the moment that military order was signed, the lawsuits followed.
Immediately.
The source notes that transgender service members immediately sued. On February 6th, Commander Emily Schilling, Commander Blake Dremen, and several other active service members, along with the Gender Justice League, filed suit. Later in March, Logan Ireland and Nicholas Bear-Bade sued over that exact same readiness order.
And the pushback against the gender ideology and the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI orders, was cataloged extensively by Fox News, too.
Who was suing there?
You have major medical and social advocacy groups entering the fray. PFL-AG and the American Association of Physicians for Human Rights sued. Doctors for America sued.
Wow.
When it came to the bans on DEI programs, structural civil rights groups like the NAACP and the National Urban League sued, alongside academic groups like the American Sociological Association.
But amidst all of these massive organizational lawsuits, there is one specific detail in the tracker that truly illustrates the astonishing reach of executive power.
The inmates.
Yes. The source points out, with specific dates, a series of lawsuits filed by individual federal inmates. We see plaintiffs listed as Jane Doe's, Mary Doe, Sarah Doe, Jane Jones, Maria Moal, identified as transgender federal inmates suing over the Restoring Biological Truth order.
It is a stark reminder of the sheer mechanical power of the presidency.
It really is.
A single stroke of a pen on a desk in the Oval Office ripples out through the Department of Justice, down through the Bureau of Prisons, and directly impacts the daily lived reality, the housing assignments, and the medical care of an individual transgender inmate sitting in a federal facility.
And what can they even do?
That inmate's only recourse against the entire weight of the executive branch is to file a federal lawsuit from their cell.
It really crystallizes the human stakes of administrative law.
Yeah, it brings it right down to the individual.
But of all the social and institutional clashes documented in this entire deep dive, there is one specific executive maneuver that genuinely made me stop, put my coffee down, and reread the source material 3 times.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
The tracker lists executive orders explicitly naming and targeting specific private domestic law firms.
It is arguably the most radical legal development contained in the entire document.
Let me read the names. The tracker lists 3 specific executive orders. Their titles are Addressing Risks from Perkins Coie LLP, Addressing Risks from Jenner and Block, and Addressing Risks from WilmerHale.
These are some of the most prominent, powerful, white shoe law firms in the world.
Right.
And predictably, the tracker shows the immediate response. On March 11th, Perkins Coie LLP sued the administration. On March 28th, Jenner and Block and WilmerHale both filed their own lawsuits.
So I have to ask you to explain this because to a layperson, this feels entirely unprecedented.
It is.
We have analyzed lawsuits from massive states, elite hospitals, military commanders, and federal inmates. But now we have massive private corporate law firms suing because the president issued an executive order specifically declaring their private businesses a risk to the nation by name.
Yeah.
Is there any historical precedent for an executive order functioning like a targeted missile against a private legal firm? And mechanically, how does the justice system even begin to process that?
To answer plainly, it is wildly unusual.
Okay, so it's not normal.
Not at all. Historically, the mechanism of an executive order is used to dictate the behavior of the federal government itself. It tells federal agencies how to interpret a law, how to manage federal employees, or how to disperse federal funds.
Right.
Executive orders can be used to sanction foreign entities or terrorists. But to use the awesome power of an executive order to specifically identify and legally target named domestic private law firms operating within the United States, that pushes executive authority into completely uncharted territory.
So what exactly is the legal argument the law firms make when they sue? They can't just go to court and say, this is unfair.
Right.
What constitutional mechanism do they invoke to defend themselves against the president?
They rely on some of the oldest and most fundamental protections in the Constitution. First, they likely argue severe violations of due process and First Amendment retaliation.
Essentially claiming the government is punishing them for their political associations or the clients they represent.
Right. But the most fascinating legal mechanism they would likely invoke is the constitutional prohibition against bills of attainder.
A bill of attainder. Let's unpack that because that sounds like something out of the Magna Carta.
It basically is.
What is it, and how does it protect a modern law firm?
It actually predates the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution explicitly forbids the government from passing a bill of attainder.
Okay.
Historically, in the British Parliament, a bill of attainder was an act of the legislature declaring a specific person or a specific group of people guilty of a crime and punishing them without a trial.
Wow. Just guilty by decree.
Exactly. The Founding Fathers despised this concept. They believed that the government should pass broad laws that apply to everyone equally, and if someone breaks those laws, they get a trial in a court.
You don't just name them.
Right. The government cannot just pass a rule saying, John Smith is guilty and his business is sanctioned.
So the law firms, Perkins Coie, Jenner, and Block, are arguing that by naming them specifically in an executive order and applying risks or penalties to them, the president is effectively issuing a modern-day bill of attainder.
Exactly. They are arguing that the executive branch has bypassed the entire judicial process to unilaterally punish a specific private business.
That is wild.
It is a profound test of constitutional boundaries. The administration seemingly decided that the lawyers fighting their agenda were a systemic risk to their operations, and they used the ultimate executive tool to target them.
The executive order.
Right. And the lawyers responded by utilizing the only defensive mechanism available in a constitutional republic. They filed a massive federal lawsuit to force a judge to evaluate the legality of the president's actions.
It is truly staggering when you step back and look at the whole board here.
It really is.
It's as if the administration is systematically walking along the outer perimeter of executive power, testing the fences at every single point.
I love that analogy.
They push the fence on government auditing with Elon Musk. They push the fence on federal funding with elite universities. They push the fence on historical war powers with local gangs. They push the fence on corporate targeting with private law firms.
Yeah.
And every single time they touch the fence, a different coalition of plaintiffs files a lawsuit to see if the fence is electrified.
That is the perfect synthesis of what the Fox News tracker reveals. It is not just a list of grievances. It is a real-time stress test of the American separation of powers.
A stress test.
Yeah. Synthesizing the sheer novelty of these executive actions explains why such a wildly diverse array of entities felt fundamentally compelled to seek judicial intervention. When the executive branch expands its operational footprint that aggressively and that rapidly, it forces every other institution in society to react with equal speed and force.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and we need to pull back and look at the vast landscape we've just traversed.
We really have.
For you, the listener, we have mapped out a scenario that redefines modern governance. We examined over 200 high-stakes federal lawsuits filed in roughly 100 days.
Unprecedented volume.
We witnessed an administrative strategy that relied on rapid-fire, sweeping executive orders to reshape the country instantaneously. And we saw this strategy met with an equally rapid, highly coordinated, and massively funded legal resistance.
It is a masterclass in modern institutional warfare.
Truly.
We watched 19 states form a defensive shield around federal data. We saw federal employee unions utilizing privacy laws to fight tech billionaires.
Wild times.
We watched the most elite universities and hospitals in the world band together to defend their research pipelines using the Administrative Procedure Act. We saw massive multi-faith theological coalitions mobilizing to defend the physical sanctity of their spaces.
By examining who is suing over what, you elevate your understanding far beyond a standard partisan political fight.
Absolutely.
As you read through the data in this source material, you are looking at an X-ray of the American Republic. You see exactly where the true levers of power reside.
You see the stress points.
Exactly. You see how billions of dollars, vast lakes of federal data, fundamental civil rights, and raw executive authority all inevitably collide inside the federal court system.
That is the ultimate analytical value of diving into a source document like this. It strips away the daily political noise and shows you the actual gears of the machine grinding against each other under maximum pressure.
So we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
It's a little homework.
Exactly. We have spent the last hour dissecting the strategy of launching hundreds of lawsuits to halt the machinery of these executive orders. But consider the long-term structural consequence of this tactic.
What does it do to the system?
What happens to the American justice system itself when it is suddenly and permanently flooded with this unprecedented volume of existential high-stakes litigation?
Yeah.
If every major policy initiative, every single funding mechanism, every bureaucratic overhaul, and every social directive is immediately tied up in federal court indefinitely, does the judicial branch effectively become the legislative branch by default?
It's a scary thought.
If the predictable relay race of government is permanently stalled by an inescapable net of preemptive lawsuits, who is actually running the country?
Something to think about.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking past the headlines and into the sources, and we will catch you next time.